Thank you for listening to my talk here. Who am I? Remote Control Productions is not just a normal developer, it's what we call a production company. So we help development studios to be able to focus primarily on development, and we take care of the rest. This is one of our claims, and this means in certain instances different things, but primarily it's about us securing deals with publishers, with helping on crowdfunding, even investment, stuff like that. Also helping on production itself. So most of our studios, which are now 16 different studios in 4 countries, started basically right after university or school. So it was very much about picking them up, helping them, shaping production processes and methods, creative and so on. On the corporate side, helping with the boring stuff, accounting, legal and all that kind of stuff. And more also marketing and PR in the last years. All those pictures in the back, games I worked on, that we as an organization worked on. Before I did remote control productions, I worked for Take-Two Interactive, which of course you all know through Rockstar and 2K. I worked on GTA, Max Payne 1, stuff like that. So I have quite some experience, I guess. Today's topic is about survival of your studio and growing it ideally after the next phase, after the initial startup phase. I would like to understand who's actually the audience. Who of you are students? Okay, 40%. Who are working in an established studio? Who's working in a studio which they would call it still a startup? Yassine, that's funny. Okay, so I guess it's fair to say that most of you are like beginners to the topic of how to build a studio and how to run it. So I will address it accordingly. So this speech will not be about super concrete things, you should do this and then you should do that and then da-da-da-da. It's more about to get you thinking about fundamental issues. And to start with, create a vision. A lot of teams we started working on were just about their vision was we want to make games. Yeah, that's great, but that's not really something which actually is bringing you through years of existence. So you really have to think about what is it you want to do as a team, as an individual, and all that. And the passion, the lifestyle of making games is a great component out of this. But what's even more important to think about, do we want to take a lot of risks? Always betting on one card. I could give an example like Crytek was doing that for a couple of years. Always betting on one card, either works or they go home. So sustainability, for example. Then what kind of games do you want to do? Do you want to make games which are more pieces of art, where you send a message, where you actually finish the game, that's it, you move on? Or are you creating services? If you create a service, it's totally different how you should build your studio, how you should actually interact with your colleagues and all that. So again, first step is really thinking about what do we really want? What's the content? What is the personal drivers of individual people? And what's the common ground as a group? One way to do this is think about values. If you check traditional academic leadership literature, it will teach you in the age of empowerment that we need values as a company. Because you want people to be self-driven, taking over responsibility and all that. And so you can't just tell them in detail what they should do. It's about find common ground on certain values, thinking about them, establish them, and try to live by them. And also hold your colleagues and your teams accountable for that. What could be these values? I mentioned sustainability. So for example, if that's one of your core values, to create a company which is sustainable, you really have to think about what happens when some of you guys get kids. That changes quite a bit the dynamic in the studio, because you're not like, okay, whatever, let's stay till 9, 10, whatever, it doesn't matter. Because you have to go home, you have to attend to kids. So it's just sustainability is one of your values. It has certain consequences. If kind of creativity is king, we always want to innovate, that means, you know, maybe it's not a great idea to work on a service-based game, because if it's successful, you work on the game for years. So maybe that's not really a fit. So thinking about values, and I also added beliefs. For me, this is a very dear subject matter about, you know, do you think that people are inherently good? Do you think that people want to be constructive? This sounds very philosophical, but I think it's a good place to start, because also from that you can derive leadership patterns, how you deal with each other, what you expect of people, how they treat each other, and all that. So who of you thought about values and beliefs in their company? 3, 4, 5. 5 out of 100 or something. So it's like, it's not even just important if you are, you know, trying to find your own studio and you are the boss or something like that. But also ask yourself, in your existing studio, what are the values of this company? What do they really want to do? Next one is more easy, and I think a lot of companies already have that. Think about objectives. And objectives can be stuff like, you know, what do we want to achieve in 3 months? This is very operational point of view. You know, it's like, okay, in the next 3 months we want to achieve this and this and that. But objectives can also be, you know, reaching certain milestones as a company. For example, okay, we start with one project. That's what you normally do in a company. Over time, do you want to go multi-project? This, for example, is one of the key questions in the early growth of the studio, because it changes everything. If you have a team and they're only doing one game, it's company and team and game is always the same. If you start having 2 teams and 2 games at the same time, it starts to happen that people do not understand anymore exactly on a daily basis what the other guys are doing. So it has very, very specific challenges if you, for example, want to do a multi-project. And there's other kinds of objectives, but really think about those. Don't be too anal about it. It's just like, you know, don't be super sad if you don't reach certain objectives, like in time. We had a lot of guys who came down with super, you know, 25 SMART goals, broken down in 3 months and years and whatever, and then every time they checked it, it was more a frustrating and sad event, to be honest, because it's very unrealistic, especially in the early phase of a company, that you were able to reach all those. And most of them you don't reach because, you know, the environment changed. It's just not really that important anymore to reach that kind of objective if you break it down into small pieces. Assess your risks. You know, there's always a potential weakness in your structure, and in this case, it's a kind of a hardware and glitch, so to say, built in by Mr. Erso. But it's really about thinking on all those different levels, you know, team, financial, legal, creative, and all that. So to have a risk list actually makes a lot of sense, and also maintain this. You know, we always made jokes about, yeah, but then you have to put as one of the maximum highest priority risks, death of the lead coder or something. You know, that's obvious. If something like this happens, it's really bad. It doesn't really matter if you have a great mitigation plan or whatsoever, because it's just, you know, bad stuff like this might happen, but normally it doesn't. But there is much more concrete risk to your company, to your team, to your project, to think about that. And I know, especially in the early phase of a company, people tend to ignore those because it's, you know, it's too real to look at them, and and people don't want to do that. When they're super enthusiastic, when they're full of energy, and it's like, wow, we want to create this game, and we are band of brothers, we all love each other, blah blah blah. To talk about risk and stuff which could go wrong is sometimes painful. But in my opinion, rather start sooner than later, because bad stuff will happen. And if you have not prepared as a company, on one hand side, you could do this as a boss, for example, but in my belief, if you didn't basically take with you the team, that you have a team which understand that there's stuff going wrong and how to deal with it, and basically stay calm and all that, you're lacking out on actually building up this part of your culture to make you, again, much more sustainable over time. So assessing risk is really, really important. Optimize company structures. A lot of times in a new studio, okay, you are the coder, so we call you CTO. You are the creative, you're the creative director, etc., etc. You get the point. And over time, you evolve, you get experience, you finish projects, you get more people in, blah, blah, blah. It might be the case that your CTO is actually not the best guy anymore to be the CTO. If you haven't established this kind of thinking in your company before, it's a huge issue. Because demoting someone in a culture where everybody thought, this is my place, and this is my hat, and this is my uniform, and this is forever, is really, really difficult. And this is very understandable why that is. This is very emotional, it's vanity, it's, you told all your friends and parents, and you're the big honcho and all that. So it's difficult. But if you from day one say, hey guys, we should drive this by competence, and if we evolve, if we go on, there might be changes, and let's talk about them openly, it makes a huge difference and saves you a lot of pain later on in this. Another point of view here is, especially if you do multi-project, you basically have to start thinking about, okay, what's the matrix organization? So what does it, if I just have 2 projects and 2 teams, are they totally separate? Is there someone else trying to help them all? What does it mean? What kind of responsibility is actually dealt with on a daily basis? So to think about structure and get into the subject matter is definitely something you have to do if you are a lead and a founder of a company. And even if you are just a team member and it's early in the life cycle of this particular company, it's good to challenge this and question and ask, who's actually my boss? If we have a strange decision, who's actually going to make that? I also encountered a couple of teams who thought, life is a democracy. That's not really the case. Even if you start out with friends in the basement and everything's kind of, let's argue until we find a compromise or decision, this will change over time. I have only seen very, very few teams who can maintain that kind of everybody's equal, this is a democracy kind of vibe. And normally, at one point in time, this will explode. One guy leaves, the dynamic changes totally, and it falls apart. So thinking about organizational structure and how to deal with it, in my opinion, is key to be able to grow your team. So we talked about brands before, and what's more important, the brand of your game or the brand of your company. In the end, of course, it makes total sense what you said before. On the other hand, to really build up a brand is like super, super difficult. What is a brand out there in gaming? EA is, Rockstar is, and then there's not that many after that, which are really considered to be a brand. If you ask someone on the street, do you know what Pixel Maniacs is? They would say, not really. And this is the same thing with Remote Control Productions or Chimera or whatever, because they're not really established brands. They might have a recognition in certain target audiences, like here, maybe people heard of it before, because it's likely, because they're all interested in that. But overall, be careful what you think you can do in regards to brand building. Why is it important? And especially over time, and this is, for example, the subject matter of employer branding. If you want to have new people coming in, joining your crew, people need to know about your company. They ideally have a positive image of it, and so on and so on. And there's lots of things you can do to actually build up a brand and employer branding. And this is, presences, conferences like this, or social media, and so on and so on. Ideally, you make successful games. The games give you awareness. You win some awards and shit, and that creates that kind of brand for you. But most of the times, you really have to build it from the ground up, and it's a tough job. Consolidate your processes. So this is also interesting because in the beginning, most people and teams do not really have a process. It's just like, yeah, we are, 5 guys in a room, we get shit done. That's great. And if we don't, we talk. That's the process. And then over time, of course, you think about, maybe, you know, development infrastructure could be improved and sped up and so on. And then you think about production, you think about agile, scrum, whatever you want to do, and also sprints and all that. So in my opinion, if you stay below, let's say 8 people, you can do way less process. That's fine. You can still go to lunch together. You know everybody well, and you can still sit in a room. But if this goes beyond that kind of number, you already have to start thinking about process. And process includes, you know, stuff like how can I take holiday? I know a lot of small companies where, you know, people are not asking for holiday because they don't know how, and they think if they just ask their buddy boss, he thinks, you know, why do you want to take holiday? You know, don't you enjoy working here more because we make games? You know, this is like, if you come around and say, hey, this is by the way how we do this, people feel much more easy also to ask about stuff. So don't underestimate this. You know, it's like in the early years we had to actually send people to do holidays or do this or to do that. So be outspoken about basic processes like these corporate ones, like holidays and sick and stuff like that, is one thing. But also on the production itself, it makes a lot of sense to think about, you know, what's the philosophy behind our production methods? How do we actually tackle them? How do we iterate them? And super, super important, how do you challenge them? A lot of people are super annoyed by processes because, you know, it drags down their efficiency, time, whatever. But if you explain also that if you see process and you don't like them, or you have a suggestion, and making clear and creating this environment that it's totally okay to challenge it and come up with different solutions, would also would have saved us a lot of pain in the beginning, where we didn't realize that yet. That a lot of people need at least a little bit of structure, and if you put stuff out in the open, it's more easy for them to ask. And tech stack is the same thing. You know, it's like you really should make as aware decisions on your tech as possible. I'm super happy that it's not so bad anymore like back in the days where everybody wanted to do their own engines and all that. You know, now we have Unity and stuff, and it's very low entry barrier to actually use it. But back in the days, it was really, really difficult. Everybody wanted to do everything on their own. It was really horrible. And then of course, you can imagine what kind of problems you have. You don't find the right guys to work with your tech because it's super complicated. You lose key talent. Nobody knows anymore how it actually is, actually how to work with it, and so on and so on. This, by the way, includes also not just development technologies or tools, but also, you know, your normal kind of, you know, what kind of email client do you use? Do you use Slack? If you use both, how do you distinguish and stuff like that? Scale can be up or down. You know, it's like, especially also in the first phase, people tend to think that, you know, it always goes up. Everything will be great. There won't be any problems. All the games we make will be at least slightly successful. This is unfortunately not true. And so if you think about scaling, you should also think about, you know, what kind of fail-safes and protections can you have within the company, within the team, to either go up or down. Meaning, for example, if you want to go up, ideally establishing another round of leadership in the team to be able to have more people coming in, that the pain of growth is less. That's one example. Or I mentioned already, you know, maybe changing roles with some of the guys. And down is also the same thing. It starts with legal. You know, how are your contracts shaped? If you have a publishing agreement and the publisher cancels your game, which most of them will have in their contracts that they can, you know, are you actually prepared for that? Did you ever tell that to your teammates that this might be happening? It's not necessarily highly probable, but it might happen. So legally, you know, all the employee contracts, what's the cancellation periods, stuff like that is quite important. Also, you know, to come up financially, you know, over time, you know, have a certain cash reserve, manage this in a way that you are like, okay, my cost per month is, let's say, 20,000 euros. It would be good if we have at least a cash reserves of 60. So for 3 months, no income, which is, most cases unlikely. You either have some passive income still because you have your own games out or you work for hire primarily. Then you should know normally what kind of lead time do you need if something happens to get another deal. But thinking about stuff like that and managing potentially up or down is really important. For some people, this again is kind of a difficult topic because they don't want to think about that. What if something goes wrong? And but again, it's a cultural thing. If you establish this also quite openly with your teammates, I think this helps a lot in the long term. And if you do that, and you experience that some of you guys freak out, and then maybe they're not built for this particular phase in your company. Maybe you should, kind of let them go in a way. And when you are much bigger, much stronger, security, longevity of the company is more guaranteed, then they should come back. I think this is super obvious. In games, we have this great advantage that we need, more or less cheap computers and people. The computers are easy to get, it's not really expensive anymore. Even on console, it's not crazy anymore. But again, also back in the days, that was way different. Dev station, PlayStation back in the days did cost 15,000 euros each. So for a small team, that's an issue. And talent is the key ingredient for whatever you do. It's reflected in the quality of the game. It's reflected into, can you actually manage? And for me, that's very important. Is your team reliable too? If you plan out and you say, okay, this is the game we want to do. It will, take us 5 months, blah blah blah, and then you crunch your numbers and say, okay, it costs us 100,000 euros. I personally rather have a less awesome game in that budget than an awesome one which will never finish. Because this will actually, the second one will kill the company. The first one, if I deliver and I, get my securities and fail safes in place, it will at least increase the chance that we have another try. And you made 130 apps, so I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You rather finish a project than dragging it out forever. And this again is also very much based on the team and what the spirit is and the level of communication, how they're dealing with each other, and very importantly, what level of trust you have with your team. Another element with the team is, I mentioned passion before. There's a lot of people who have a big passion for game development, but they kind of forget, that life moves on, stuff changes, so growing, learning is actually a key element to still be able to make great games. And there's people who don't like that. They don't like reading books or listening to audiobooks or whatever. They don't really, take some extra effort watching out some YouTube videos or go to conferences or stuff like that. So they basically stay in their place. And that's not necessarily always bad. If you know about this, again, if it's out in the open, then you can deal with it, but ideally everybody understands that you have to grow as a person with your hard skills, coding, code faster, better, whatever, make greater art and stuff like that, but also the soft skills are super important, because again, it's a team effort. If the hygiene and the climate within the team is not great, based on the soft skills, you will not be able to achieve anything good. Conscious decisions for your projects. In the early phase, I've seen this a lot of times, teams tend to try to sign and do every project which comes up their iron side. And I get that, it's like you better have a small bird in your hand than nothing at all, but you have to be really careful, especially when you grow. So taking over, if you work with partners, small projects here and there, 50K, 100, whatever, it's okay because the overall timing is not that crazy. You can think about the next 3-6 months. But when a team like this is taking over a project for 1.5, 2 years, the whole dynamic changes. You know, in an instant, the people who were quite good in assessing how much time we need, they can't deal with the complexity because they're not experienced with it. How should they, you know, if they did something else before? So taking conscious decisions on scope, how big the projects are, the potential partner. You know, a lot of the publishers. Why do publishers sometimes have a bad reputation within the development community? Because they sometimes fuck up, as the same as development studios do, obviously, but because of different reasons. So also make a conscious decisions about your partner. If a partner gives you a deal which is super awesome, maybe there's something strange here happening. Why are they doing this? So really think about that. What's the interest of the other party? What do they want? What did they do in the past? Can they, you know, when you talk to them, what do they put on the table? What did they think about your game or the project, the collaboration before and all that? And again, the team. You know, is your team? Does your team want to do that? You know, your team was doing core games. You potentially have a project for free-to-play casual. Is that a good idea for that kind of team? You should at least think about it. And you can think about other elements where you should be conscious about that financially and so on. But these are the main ones. So multiple pitching here is, there's only a few game developers in the world who were, you know, I see Travian here in the room, who were kind of successful with their first game. That's super awesome, but this is not the norm. This is the playing the lottery and winning it. It also has its own problems, to be honest, but you know, that's another story. But if you are kind of an average studio doing sometimes some stuff on your own, getting subsidies from Bavaria, getting a partner in to finance it like a publisher or whatever, it makes a lot of sense that you have a lot of balls in the air at the same time. So only betting on one opportunity is not necessarily a great idea. On the other hand, if you have too many balls in the air and only focusing on that, that's crazy too. But what we did for most of our teams is that we allocate a certain percentage of the potential productivity of a team per month to pitching. This normally is reflected in the end in money, because you know, time is money and people want to earn a salary and all that. But again, it's about consciously making a decision. Okay, now we're in a phase where we want to grow, so we allocate whatever 10% of our time to pitching. If you're super established and everything's smooth and you have, you know, for the next 12 months projects are lined up, maybe you'll just allocate 3%. But it's really important that you have multiple balls in the air and you are never stopping thinking about that. We've seen a lot of teams get like, oh, we just signed a project, great, right? So the project is a year, so let's start pitching again in a year. That's basically the road to failure. Because the chance that in a year, when you start pitching, you get a project like this is near zero. So you really have to think also kind of anti-cycle on how to do it. I already mentioned partnerships quite a bit, so sustainable partnerships are awesome. If you find a partner and you have a good collaboration and you could do a second project, a third one or whatever, go for it. But you know, also on this subject matter, be aware that those partners, you know, in most cases these companies, they might change. The guy you work with for 5 years might quit. The new guy, for whatever reason, hates you. The relationship is done. So again, coming back to the pitching, it's like, okay, but we want to get this client because this is then for sure, it's going to be awesome, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, maybe for a while, but sooner or later, there's going to be change. And on the one hand side, being aware of this potentially change is really important. On the other hand, you know, don't lose your optimism and always take at least a little bit of leap of faith. If you enter a partnership too cynical from day one, it will likely also fail. Because people get the vibe, they get the emotion, they get that you don't really like them. Never tell a publisher, you are like the third option or something like that. That's really, really horrible. It's like people want to be acknowledged as a good partner. This is a strong collaboration, blah blah blah. So I mentioned again, that this adventure and this quest has its ups and downs. So it's really important also to think about your personal energy. If it goes up and down, how do you handle that? Do you improve on your own emotional management, so to say? I personally, I have a coach. I go to a peer-to-peer entrepreneurs club. I read a lot of books. I talk to a lot of people. I reflect myself all the time. If I wouldn't do that, I couldn't do my job because I would have already, broken down under the pressure we had in the last 12 years. I don't know, X, Y, Z times where we nearly went bankrupt or something like that. So we have, people quitting, all those stuff, all those situations where you feel the pressure, where you really feel that, life's not that easy. So preparing for those, again, you can do stuff on the financial side, insurances, blah, 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 blah. But in the end, in my opinion, this is very much about a very individual growth path, and how to deal with pressure, how to deal with emotions, and how to make conscious decisions and basically stay true to yourself. And this is already, stay sane and keep succeeding. This is kind of my end of it. If you try to do everything with kind of a common sense, if you don't get too paranoid, sometimes, and I don't want to generalize too much, some of the technical guys of you are way too paranoid, everything should be over a German server, otherwise the NSA is spying us out, whatever, that kind of vibe, or that's not really sane, in my opinion, over time. But if you're a business guy trying to, sign every deal over time, that's not necessarily a great decision. If you think the team members you find, your employees, whatever, will stay for you forever, that's not going to happen. Life's going to change and people's goals are changing. So the same, keeping succeeding, to stay with John Enrico is hopefully something you're able to do. Thank you very much.